Good evening. Dean of the Faculty of Management Studies. I'm equally delighted to welcome Professor T.U.I. Peiris,
Obviously, you're not audible.
As the resource persons for today's session on qualitative approach. Look forward to the valuable insights and respect. I also welcome Professor Jananthan Devasiri, the mayor. We are thrilled to have our enthusiastic participants with us today, our undergraduates from the Faculty of Management Studies. Once again, I welcome you all of you and wish you a highly engaging and enriching session ahead. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's session. Let me begin by highlighting the esteemed background of Professor Peiris. Professor T.U.I. Peiris is an esteemed academic with over 16 years of experience in finance and head of the Department of Accountancy and Finance, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. He holds a PhD in Economics from University Putra, Malaysia, an MSc in Financial Mathematics from Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. He has played a significant role in both undergraduate and postgraduate education. He is actively involved in research supervision, curriculum development, and various university committees, contributing to the academic advancement of Sabaragamuwa University. Professor Peiris has authored numerous publications and books on topics such as stock market volatility, trade integration, and financial literacy, further cementing his reputation as a leading researcher in his field. He continues to deliver keynote speeches, chair conferences, and contribute to the academic community through his involvement in local and international. To highlight the esteemed background of Dr. Munasinghe. Dr. Munasinghe graduated from Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka before receiving his master's degree from the Postgraduate Institute of Management, University of Sri Jayawardenepura, Sri Lanka, and completed PhD in Hospitality from Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand. He currently works as a senior lecturer attached to the Department of Tourism Management, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. Dr. Munasinghe has played a significant role in both undergraduate and postgraduate education and research supervision. His major research areas are concept of hospitality, host-guest relationship, touristic experience of hospitality, and customer service. He has published a number of research articles in recognized journals both in Sri Lanka and overseas. With that, I now respectfully invite both of you to the session. Over to you, sirs.
Thank you, Madhusha, for your introduction. I understand that I am the one to go first. Yes, Professor Ushan?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I must be thankful to Professor Ushan Peiris and Professor Devasiri and the team who is organizing this wonderful initiative of Thesis Mastery Program. And I take great pleasure in being part of this. So I'm expected to talk about trustworthiness, basically in qualitative research. Let me share my slides, please. And I hope I'm audible to you all. Yes?
Yes, sir, all good.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm happy to see that program is very punctual, so I don't want to waste any time. We'll go down to the job directly. Yeah, I actually have one assumption before I proceed that I observed this whole process of or the series of lectures, and I got a chance to look at some of them as well. So I assume that the participants have a very good understanding of the fundamentals of qualitative research in terms of basically the philosophical assumptions and the reasons for our choice to qualitative approaches. So with that understanding, I will proceed. Whatever the research, may it be qualitative or quantitative or mixed, the idea of trust is very relevant and imperative, meaning it's highly important. I think as you understand, the link between your objectives and your findings is rather created through your methodology. So the soundness of the methodology and trustworthiness of your how component of your research is fundamentally important in believing in the findings of your research. So if our methodological approach is not trustworthy or sound, our findings have no value. So therefore, trustworthiness is important in all the forms of research. And particularly related to qualitative research, it is more important, more in the sense that, I mean, I'm not telling that it's more important than quantitative research. Anyway, given the specific nature of qualitative research, the idea of trustworthiness is very important. Because as you all are aware, qualitative research, in qualitative research, we assume that and we believe in the idea that our realities are subjective, or realities are constructed rather. So therefore, we believe in multiple realities. So my reality of perceiving a phenomenon can be different to another researcher's or person from another context. So basically, with this philosophical assumption, trustworthiness is very important. And also, we are talking about contextual understanding of a phenomenon in qualitative research. So contexts are different from each other, basically based on the ideas of time and space and basically the value systems as well. Context කියන ඒවා තනින් තරට වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. මේ context අපි if you take one context like Sabaragamuwa University, how things happen here can be very different to a university in India or America or any other country. And even within our Sri Lankan context, our context of Sabaragamuwa University, for example, can be different to Jayawardhanapura or Jaffna or any other example as you wish. So anyway, these differences give some challenges in establishing trustworthiness in qualitative research. So in simple terms, as you can see the second point here, in trustworthiness, we are talking about this idea that how congruent are the findings with the reality. How congruent our findings with the reality that we are exploring. එතකොට මේ දෙක අපේ findings කොයිතරම් දුරට reality එක represent කරනවාද කියන කාරණාව තමයි සරලව ගත්තොත් එහෙම trustworthiness කියලා කියන්නේ. So given the flexible nature of qualitative research, you know the basic characteristics of qualitative research. One important aspect of qualitative research is that as researchers you can have some flexibility, more flexibility compared to quantitative research. So with this flexibility, we can have a number of tools and techniques to establish trustworthiness. Further, there is no formulas for this because the techniques you apply can be different according to the nature of your research. So, as you have mentioned here, expect only some recommendations in this presentation. Okay, I will give you a few things that we can do in our research to establish trustworthiness, depending on the feasibility, depending on the nature of your research. You can choose what to do and what not to do. Moving on. The idea of trustworthy, I'm going to totally based on the work of Lincoln and Gubas, 1985. There are a number of authors who have presented different approaches to establish trustworthiness, but the most widely accepted typology is from these authors. So we are talking about 4 areas. As you can see here in the second column, credibility, dependability, transferability, and conformability. So the title is Trustworthiness Framework, Qualitative to Quantitative to Qualitative Applications. මෙතන තියෙන්නේ qualitative එකේදී අපි කතා කරන, quantitative එකේදී අපි කතා කරන validity, reliability, generalizability, objectivity. Professor Ushan will deal with those areas. And qualitative parallels for those are credibility, dependability, transferability, and conformability. And simple translation, as you can see here in the third column, and you have in the fourth column, what does it actually mean? So I will explain that further. One thing I have to emphasize here is that by this translation or introducing quantitative parallels of qualitative trustworthiness approaches, we or I basically do not say that we can establish trustworthiness in a qualitative research as in the case of quantitative research, which is not necessary as well. Let me repeat in Sinhalese. May approaches 4 දෙනකින් අදහස් කරන්නේ නැහැ quantitative research එකක් හා සමානව අපිට validity reliability establish කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. සහ එහෙම අවශ්‍යතාවයකුත් නැහැ. මොකද අපේ qualitative approaches වල තියෙන වෙනම අරමුණු ටිකක්. ඒක quantitative research වලින් ටිකක් වෙනස්. ඒක නිසා අපි පුළුවන් තරම් උත්සාහ කරන්න හදන්නේ අපේ qualitative research වල තියෙන ප්‍රධානම ලක්ෂණය තමයි අපේ subjectivity එක. research එකේ subjectivity එක involve වෙනවා research process එකට. Not only for the analysis but throughout the process this involvement is there. And also there are some contextual differences as I just explained. Right? ඒ සන්දර්භය තුළ පවතින uniqueness විශේෂීතාව තියෙනවා. ඒ අනුව අපිට එක සන්දර්භයක කරන research එකක් තව සන්දර්භයක එහෙම පිටින්ම apply කරන්නවත් repeat කරන්නවත් අමාරුයි. quantitative research එක වගේ. නමුත් අපිට එහෙම කරන්න අවශ්‍යතාවයකුත් නැහැ qualitative research වලදී. මොකද අපේ අරමුණ තියෙන්නේ යම්කිසි සන්දර්භයක තියෙන සංසිද්ධියක් ඊටාම ගැඹුරින් සහ පුළුල් ලෙස අධ්‍යයනය කිරීම පමණයි. එතකොට මේ සමහර කාරණාවලදී අපි උත්සාහ කරන්නේ පුළුවන් තරම් සබ්ජෙක්ටිවිටි එක අඩු කරගන්න. සහ අපේ රිසර්ච් වර්ක් එක කියවන කෙනාට නැත්නම් ඒක රිෆර් කරන කෙනාට විශ්වසනීය භාවයක් ඇති කරන්න. හරි? ඒක නිසා මේකෙන් මම නැවතත් කියන්නේ quantitative research එක හා සමානවම අපිට reliability validity prove කරන්න එකක් හැකියාව නැහැ. Because of the challenges of qualitative research, the nature of qualitative research, අනික තමයි අවශ්‍යතාවයක් නැහැ because of the need of qualitative research. Okay, with that we'll move on to these four criteria that we use to establish trustworthiness in qualitative research. Okay, first one is trustworthiness. Credibility. Credibility is something like internal validity in quantitative research. Internal validity එකක් කියලා කතා කරනවා ප්‍රොෆෙසර් උෂාන් කතා කරා ඒව ගැන. එතකොට මෙතෙන්දී අපි කතා කරන්නේ basically confidence in the truth of the finding. ඒක රිසර්ච් එකට කොයිතරම් විශ්වාසයිද ඔයාලගේ නැත්නම් මගේ රිසර්ච් එක reality එක අපි study කරලා ඒක data collect කරලා findings විදිහට findings අපි ගන්නකොට නැත්නම් conclusions වලට යනකොට මේ දෙක අතර සම්බන්ධතාවය කොයිතරම් ශක්තිමත්ද? Or to what extent your findings represent the reality that you study. එතකොට මේකේ තියෙන මේ challenge එක තමයි subjective nature කියන එක. මොකද අපි multiple realities කියන assumption එකකට යනකොට තියෙන ප්‍රශ්නේ තමයි අපි දේවල් දිහා දැකලා ස්වභාවික ලෝකේ natural world එකේ තියෙන දේවල් දිහා බලලා ඒවා interpret කරනකොට අපේ frame of reference එක හරහා තමයි අපි ඒක කරන්නේ. Remember that any analysis in qualitative research do not happen in a vacuum. Vacuum එක ඉස් අවකාශයක නෙවෙයි වෙන්නේ. අපේ මනස already occupied with a lot of predispositions, opinions, right? A lot of background that are cultural, religious or any other. මේ හැම දෙයක් එක්කම තමයි අපි analysis එක කරන්නේ මනසින්. Interpretation එකක් දෙන්නේ. එතකොට ඒ interpretation එකට necessarily there is an involvement of the researcher's bias. ඒක තියෙනවා. ඒක නැහැ කියන්න බෑ. එතකොට ඒක අපි මෙතෙන්දී credibility කියන එකට තියෙන measures වලදී අපි උත්සාහ කරන්නේ පුළුවන් තරම් මේ biases ටික අඩු කරගන්න. පැහැදිලිද? ඒක නිසා ඒකට ගන්න ක්‍රියාමාර්ග ගැන තමයි අපි කතා කරන්නේ under the measures of establishing credibility. As you can see in the last point, however, the elimination of biases and selective perceptions. අපි හැමෝගෙම තියෙන selective perceptions. අපි දකින කෝණයෙන් විතරයි අපි දෙයක් දිහා බලන්නේ. එතකොට අපිට තේරුම් යන්නේ ඒ කෝණයට පේන වපසරිය විතරයි. And developing trust with the participants can be taken as measures to enhance credibility. ඊට පස්සේ කියනවා developing with the trust with the participants. අපි කියන කතා කරමු කොහොමද ඒවා කෙරෙන්නේ කියලා. So remember that elimination of biases is a good approach to establish credibility. Now we'll see what are the things we can practically do to establish credibility. One is prolonged engagement. මේක සරලව කිව්වොත් එහෙම අපි කියන්නේ අපිට පුළුවන් උපරිමයට prolonged කියලා කියන්නේ උපරිමයට කියන එක නෙමෙයි ඇත්තටම දිගු කාලයක් රිසර්ච් එකත් එක්ක ෆීල්ඩ් එකත් එක්ක පාටිසිපන්ට්ස්ලත් එක්ක එන්ගේජ් වෙලා ඉන්නවා. එහෙම වෙනකොට වෙන්නේ අපිට ඒ සන්දර්භය හඳුනා ගැනීමේ හැකියාව වැඩි වෙනවා අපේ කාලය වැඩි වීමත් සමගම. දැන් උදාහරණයකට ගත්තොත් එහෙනම් අපි යම්කිසි සන්දර්භයක් ගැන කතා කරනකොට අපි හිතමු මොකක් හරි ගම් අපි හිතමු අපේ ලංකාවේ ඉන්න ඉන්ඩිජිනස් කමියුනිටි එක වැද්දා කමියුනිටි එක ගැන you are going to do a research. right? එතකොට අපි මෙහෙ ඉන්නේ. ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ ජීවිත ගැන අපිට තියෙන බොහොම සුළු අත්දැකීම් ප්‍රමාණයක්. right? ගිහිල්ලා විනාඩි 15ක 20ක විතර data collection එකක් කරලා නැත්නම් interview එකක් කරලා නැත්නම් අපිට පැය දෙකක් වුණත් හිටියයි කියලා can you see or can you assume that our understanding of the community or the context is sufficient? Right? That is the question. එතකොට ඒ අපි වෙනම කල්චර් එකකට හරි වෙනම ෆිනොමිනන් එකක් තියෙන කොන්ටෙක්ස්ට් එකකට ගියාට පස්සේ එතන අපිට අවශ්‍ය වෙන්නේ to talk about that phenomenon in the context, we have to have a thorough understanding about the context. So prolonged engagement meaning that you engage with the context and with the participants as long as possible so that you can increase your understanding of the context. So if you interpret something, if you tell something about the community with a surface level understanding, what happens is our interpretations can be very much misleading. So to stop that, we need prolonged engagement. That's a simple idea, right? So become oriented to the situation so that context is appreciated and understood. අපි කතා කරන මොකක් හරි ඔයාලගේ රිසර්ච් වල ඇති එක phenomenon ඒව ගැන පුළුවන් තරම් ස්ටඩි කරන්න, පුළුවන් තරම් engage වෙන්න ඕන. right? එතකොට තමයි අපට හම්බ වෙන්නේ ගැඹුරු අදහසක් ඒ සන්දර්භයේ සත්‍ය ස්වභාවය ගැන. ඊට පස්සේ be able to detect and account for distortions that might be in the data. Distortions, ඒ කියන්නේ අපේ perceptions, අපේ understanding එක වෙනස් වෙන්න, ඒකට බාධාවල් වෙන්න පුළුවන් දේවල් මොනවද? biases අපි ගත්තොත් එහෙම research එකේ side එකෙන් biases තියෙනවා, participant ගේ side එකෙන් biases තියෙනවා. right? Our prejudices කියන දේවල්, අපේ preoccupied ideas කියන දේවල් බලපාන්න පුළුවන් අපේ incidents ගැන කතා කරනකොට අපේ interpretations වලට. දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට මගේ රිසර්ච් එකකින් මම ගත්තොත් එහෙම I talked about foreign tourist experience of hospitality in Sri Lanka. So they were talking about basically their experience of dealing with Sri Lankan people. So I am a Sri Lankan, so there is a natural tendency that I can be biased and promoting more and more positive, or highlighting or emphasizing more and more positive incidents while demoting or sometimes discouraging the appearance of negative experiences in the finding. That is because I am a Sri Lankan and I don't like negatives to be talked about the country. Right? ඒක වගේ natural biases තියෙනවා. So the first thing is to understand how you as a researcher can be biased in your interpretation. Right? And also from the side of the respondents, එයාලගේ පැත්තෙන් එක එක බාධාවල් තියෙනවා, truth එක නොකියයි නැත්නම් යථාර්ථය එළියට දාන්න නැතුව ඉන්න බාධාවල් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? ඒක power gap තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? Any other දේවල් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? ඒක නිසා මේ biases මොනවද කියලා තේරුම් ගැනීම තමයි වැදගත් වෙන්නේ, සහ ඒ තේරුම් අරගත්ත විතරක් මදි. එහෙම තේරුම් අරගෙන මේ biases කොහොමද අපි අඩු කරගන්නේ, minimize කරගන්නේ. ඒකට ගන්න ක්‍රියාමාර්ගයක් තමයි prolonged engagement කියලා කියන්නේ. right? එතකොට ඒක විතරක් නෙමෙයි, අත්‍තරම් prolonged engagement එක හරහා අපිට පුළුවන් මේ දේවල් තේරුම් ගන්න. right? මෙතන එක වචනයක් මම කැමති highlight කරන්න, throughout the මම ඒක ගැන නැවත කතා කරන්න අවසානයේ මේ reflexive self analysis. Reflexive self analysis is very very important for a qualitative researcher. Qualitative and quantitative researcher කෙනෙක්ට අපේ වැදගත් as, and I think it's a human quality as well. Something you need to inculcate. We need to inculcate reflective self analysis. ඒ කියන්නේ තමන්ගේ සිතුවිලි කොහොමද වැඩ කරන්නේ, තමන් මොන මොන තැන් වලද biased වෙන්නේ, තමන්ට යම් කිසි විදිහකට හිතන්න මොන වගේ කාරණා බලපානවද කියන දේවල් තේරුම් ගන්න. ඒ අවබෝධය තියාගන්න එක හරි වටිනවා. එතකොට තමයි අපිට තේරෙන්නේ අපි මොන මොන තැන් වලද biased වෙන්නේ කියලා. අපේ සිතුවිලි නිවැරදිද නැද්ද කියන එක, අපේ interpretations නිවැරදිද නැද්ද කියන එක අපිටම තේරුම් ගන්න පුළුවන් අවස්ථාවක් තමයි ක්‍රමයක් තමයි reflective self analysis කියලා කියන්නේ. ඒක නිසා ඒක මේක කියන තරම් ලේසි නැහැ කරන්න. Right? But you need to practice. That is very very important to be clear on how you think and what are the reasons for your reasons influencing the way you think. Right? අපි හිතන විදිහට බලපාන කාරණා මොනවද කියලා තෝරගන්න. Then question your own findings, own interpretations. මේවා නැවත නැවත ප්‍රශ්න කර නිවැරදි දේ හොයාගන්න ඕන. Right? and providing bracketed comments on any opinions and evaluative comments. Right? Bracketed opinions. එතකොට අපේ තියෙන අර biases කියන දේවල් bracket කරගන්න. වරහන් ඇතුලේ ඒ ටික දාගෙන ඊටු ටික දිහා open mind එකකින් බලන්න. විවෘත මනසකින් දේවල් දිහා බලන්න පුරුදු වෙන්න ඕන. So that is, I think, the number one quality that can enhance quality of a researcher, that can enhance trustworthiness of a research. ඊට පස්සේ මෙවැනිම තව දෙකක් තියෙනවා, persistent observation, not similar but you can combine them prolonged engagement plus persistent observation කියලා කියන්නේ දිගින් දිගටම observe කරන්න, observe නැවත question කරන්න, right? එකයි මෙතන කියන්නේ prolonged engagement provides scope, persistent observation provides depth of your understanding. It was a triangulation. I think you have already heard about this. Triangulation means having multiple perspectives, multiple sources of data, and multiple methods and multiple analysts to the same phenomenon, so that it is not the only single mind, single perspective that look into data. එතන තියෙන narrow එකක්, single mind එකකින් දෙයක් බලනකොට ඒක narrow. එතකොට ඒක wide කරගන්න පුළුවන් හැකියාවක් තමයි අපට ලැබෙන්නේ triangulation එකේදී. එතකොට අපිට then triangulation කරන ක්‍රම කීපයක් තියෙනවා. Assuming that you have already touched this point, I will skip this quickly. Method triangulation, right? අපිට එකම phenomenon එක දිහා එක අපි data collection method වෙන්න පුළුවන් නේද? methods කීපයකින් බලන්න පුළුවන්. ඊට පස්සේ sources, right? Again අපිට different sources වලින් information ගන්න පුළුවන් එකම කාරණයක් ගැන to cross check findings and to see whether something one person said is truth or false, right? And also do the same thing in different points of time, right? And different places, and comparing people with different opinions or viewpoints, right? ඒ වගේ කරලා අපිට වඩාත් පුළුල් දැක්මක් ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන් මොකක් හරි ඔයාලා කතා කරන්න යන phenomenon එක සම්බන්ධ. ඊට පස්සේ analyst triangulation එක, you know that you have different analyst and theory of perspective triangulation. ඒකත් credibility එක enhance කරන්න උදව් වෙනවා. ඊට පස්සේ තව වැදගත් එකක් තියෙනවා peer debriefing or peer scrutiny කියලා. When you do your research, maybe possibly you can do this with the analysis and you can observe, get the comments from the peers for the whole process as well. But basically we are talking about data collection and analysis. You can get the support of, not the support, of course, you can give it to a peer to cross-check whether your conclusions or the findings you came out from the data set are okay, or is there anything else to be added? Is there anything anything missed from you, right? So peer කෙනෙක් අරගෙන තමන්ගේ analysis process එක check කරගන්නවා කියන එක තමයි මේකේ සරල අදහස. It is a process of exposing oneself to a disinterested peer in a manner paralleling an analytical session and for the purpose of exploring aspects of the inquiry that might otherwise remain only implicit within the inquirer's mind. සමහරවිට අපිට අපේ මනසේ විතරක් තියෙන දේවල් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ දේවල් peer කෙනෙක් එක්ක කතා කරලා මම මේ analysis එකේදී මෙන්න මේ විදිහට codes, categories, themes හදාගත්තා. ඒකට මෙන්න මේ හේතු බලපෑවේ. ඔයා කොහොමද මේක දිහා බලන්නේ? ඔයාට වෙන view එකක් තියෙනවද? වෙන අදහසක් තියෙනවද? right? එතකොට peer කෙනෙක්ගේ help එක ගන්න එක තමයි බොහොම සරලව කිව්වොත් එහෙනම් මෙතන වෙන්නේ. right? ඒව හරහා අපිට පුළුවන් අපි ආපු conclusions ටික හරිද වැරදිද තව වෙනස් වෙන්න ඕනද කියන එක cross check කරගන්න. ඊට පස්සේ member checking කියලා කියන්නේ peer reviewing වගේ, නමුත් එතෙන්දී peer කෙනෙක් නෙවෙයි ඉන්නේ participant කෙනෙක්. right? peer කෙනෙක් වෙනුවට අපි ගන්නවා participant කෙනෙක්. ඔයාට data collection වලට මේ data සපයපු කෙනෙක්. right? මේකත් ගොඩාක් valid method එකක්. Because it is the participants or people who provided data are checking whether your conclusions are okay with them. Right? Correct කියන වචන මම පාවිච්චි කරන්නේ. Correct කියලා එකක් එන්නේ නැහැ අත්‍තරම මේ qualitative research වල. One way of thinking basically. One reality. right? ඒ reality එක තව කෙනෙක්ට වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් ඒක අපි පුළුවන් තරම් enrich කරගන්න එක තමයි මෙතෙන්දී උත්සාහ කරන්නේ. So the data analytic categories, interpretations and conclusions are tested with participants. Right? මේක මමත් මගේ research එකෙත් කීප දෙනෙක් එක කරා. Right? ඒගොල්ලෝ මේ හිටියේ නැති වුණාට මම මේ theoretical framework එක අපු codes categories ඒ වගේ ඒගොල්ලන්ට සරල තේරෙන භාෂාවෙන් මොකද අපේ කරන research level එකේ නෙමෙයි අපේ participants line. එතකොට ඒ level දෙක match කරගන්න ඕන. ඒ කරලා ඒ ටික කමියුනිකේට් කරන් පස්සේ ගොඩක් අය රෙස්පොන්ඩ් කරනවා. That's a very good method that you can easily do this, of course. මේක formally වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්, informally වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? This can happen formally or informally. ඒ කියන්නේ data collection එක ඉවර වෙලා conclusions වලට ඇවිල්ලා ඊට පස්සේ check කරගන්නත් පුළුවන්. Otherwise, if you can go like in the meantime, you can do that as well. Right? Conclusions වලට යන්න කලින් during the process you can do this. Yeah, that is member checking. So with all those measures, we can work on credibility, right? Again, credibility is making sure that your findings represent the reality you studied, right? ඒකට ගන්න පුළුවන් ක්‍රම කිහිපයක් තමයි අපි කතා කරේ. මට මිනිත්තුවක් දෙන්න. Right. Welcome back. Dependability, the second one, it is basically about the repeatability or replicability as a quantitative parallel. Right? Quantitative වලදී අපි කතා කරන whether your research can be repeated or replicated කියන එක තමයි මේකෙදී අදහස් කරන්නේ. Right? Yet again, the challenge of repeating a qualitative research is that it's focused on the context, right? Context එකක් මත තුල ගැඹුරින් දේවල් හදාරන නිසා ඒ context එකම නැවත තැනක තියෙයිද කියන ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙනවා research එකක් repeat කරන්න. or repeat කරොත් එහෙම reliable විදියට you can get the same results, right? උදාහරණයක් කරලා මෙහි කරපු research එක කොහේරි රටක කරපුවම මේ results ම හම්බ වෙනවද නැත්නම් කොහේරි තව තැනක කරපුවම මේ results ම හම්බ වෙනවද කියන එක, right? එතකොට ඒකට තියෙන challenge එක තමයි context bound nature of the social reality, right? එතකොට අපිට researcher කෙනෙක් විදියට අපිට කරන්න පුළුවන් එකම දේ තමයි අපේ research එක පිළිබඳව ඒකේ whole process එක ගැන whole process එක present කරන එක තමයි අපිට කරන්න පුළුවන් එකම දේ, so that someone else can follow the same procedure and see whether it is the same result that is generated, right? Look at the last point, the nature of reality results in the knowledge that is bound by time. අපි ඉස්සෙල්ලා කතා කිව්වා වගේ context කියලා කියන්නේ මොනවාද? bound by time, space and values කියන එක. ඒවත් එක්ක තමයි අපේ මේ සමාජ යථාර්ථයක තියෙන්නේ. දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට සබරගමු යුනිවර්සිටි කියන අපි 96 තිබිච්ච තත්ත්වයයි 2025 තියෙන තත්ත්වයයි අතර එකම රිසල්ට්ස් එන්නේ නැහැනේ. එතකොට කාලය වෙනස්, ස්ථානීය ස්වභාවය වෙනස් නේද? ඒ හැමදේම වෙනස් වෙලා. එතකොට මේ වෙනස් වීමත් එක්ක තමයි මිනිස්සුන්ගේ සිතුම් පැතුම් චර්යා ආකල්ප experience හැම දෙයක්ම තියෙන්නේ. So therefore that difference challenge the replicability of research. So therefore what we can do to support the people who do the research once again is that we give sufficient information about the conduct of our research. තමන් කරපු සියලු procedures detailed present කරන එක තමයි තමන්ගේ research process report එකේදී වෙන අදාළ තැනකදී present කරන එක තමයි මූලික වශයෙන්ම කියන්න ඕන. So because of this context bound nature of the social knowledge, the reliability should be understood as a correspondence between what is happening in the reality and what the researcher recorded. right? එතකොට අපිට මෙතෙන්දි බලන්න තියෙන්නේ researcher record කරනවද context එකේ තියෙන සියලු දේවල් කියන එක තමයි අපිට සීමාන්තිකව බලන්න තියෙන්නේ. right? එතනින් එහාට move වෙන්න අමාරුයි. අපි බලමු ටිකක් මේක අපිට improve කරන්න. මොන වගේ දේවල්ද කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. Can you take a minute to read this slide? Okay. So here is one example as well, right? As I said, the only thing we can do is to give sufficient details about the way we conduct the research so that the others can follow it. Okay. Especially when it comes to your methodology chapter, you can include a whole description of how did you follow this procedure, right? Selection of participants, how do you approach the questions, and very specifically, especially the process of analysis, not the method of analysis, but the process of analysis is very important. Not කියන එකෙන් මම කරේ method එක කියන්න එපා කියන එක නෙවෙයි, more than the method, you have to provide step by step information. right? According to වලදී category වලට ගියේ කොහොමද? category වලදී theming වලට ගියේ කොහොමද? එතනින් එහාට යනවා නම් theoretical construction එකකට කොහොමද ගියේ? ඒ little steps පොඩි දේවල් පවා හරි වැදගත්. right? සහ ඒකට බලපාන theoretical background එක කොයි වගේද? තමන්ගේ thinking background එක කොයි වගේ දේවල් බලපෑවද? මේකට මේ label එක දෙන්න. මේ code එකට මේ label දෙක දෙන්න. මේ category එකට මේ label එක දෙන්න. මේ දෙක අතර relationship එකක් තියෙනවා කියලා පෙන්නන්න. right? ඒ ඇනලිසිස් එකේ process එක ගොඩක් වෙලාවට ලියවෙන්නේ නැහැ. ගොඩක් reports වල thematic analysis කරා කියලා කියනවා. ඒකේ මෙන්න මේ steps ටික තිබුණයි කියනවා. ඒ අරගෙන ඊට පස්සේ කැඩීම results වලට. එහෙම නැතුව ඒ process එක තවත් ටිකක් detail කරනවා නම් that will be easy for the readers or the followers to repeat your research if necessary. And ensure that your approach stays consistent if you are interviewing participants at different times. Right? එකම ආකාරයක් අපේ පැත්තෙන් as researchers, from the side of researchers, you can follow consistent procedures. And also, very importantly, invite an external reviewer to review the process. අපි කියන audit එකක් කියලා. Right? ඒ වගේ audit එකක් කරහා තව perspective එකකින් අපිට බලන්න පුළුවන් අපේ process එක. And also ensure transparency. For the last point, by documenting your research thoroughly, you make it easier for others to replicate your study and trust your findings. Right? එතන දෙකක් වෙනවා. You give the ability for someone else to repeat your study, plus you increase your transparency because you document the whole process of your planning and thinking and interpretation. That will also enhance the trustworthiness. Okay? Transferability කියන්නේත් අර්ක වගේමයි repeat කරන්න කියන එක නෙමෙයි ඇත්තටම to see whether your findings can be generalized, right? To see whether qualitative findings can be generalized into other context. That is the idea of transferability. මේකත් ඇත්තටම challenging වගේම අපිට එක්තරා විදිහකට අපේ අරමුණකුත් නෙවෙයි in qualitative research. But අපිට ඒකට support කරන්න පුළුවන් යම් කිසි විදිහට transferability. මම එහෙම කියන්නේ දැන් මම අමතර කතාවකුත් කියන්නම් ඔයාලට චුට්ටක් ගැඹුරු වෙටුණා. දැන් qualitative camps ගත්තාම 1960s ඉඳලා qualitative researchers ලගේ එක schools of thoughts වගේ තියෙනවා මේ eras කීපයක්. right එතකොට අපි මුල්ම era එකේදී තමයි මේ trustworthiness කියන එකට ලොකු බරක් දුන්නේ. right? They emphasize that it should be trustworthy, very similar to the quantitative research. තව පොඩ්ඩක් කල් යනකොට ඊට පස්සේ ඒකට ලොකු weight එකක් හමුණා. දැන් ඇත්තටම තියෙන constructive camp එකේදී trustworthiness එක ගැන ලොකු weight එකක් දෙන්නේ නැහැ අපි because the fundamental assumptions of the qualitative research and also the purpose of doing qualitative research. right ඒ වගේ තැනදී අපිට දැන් generalizability කියන එක which is not of course necessary in qualitative research, but we can see whether our findings can be applicable to any other place, can be applicable to any other place, right. Showing the findings have applicability in other contexts or external validity in quantitative research. This is also an issue in qualitative research owing to the non-representative small size sample and non-random procedures. right? එතකොට quantitative එකදී වගේ ඔය sample මේ වෙනකොට කතා කරලා තියෙ වගේ systematic tools and techniques පාවිච්චි වෙනවා අඩුයි qualitative research වලදී. non-random sampling තමයි ගොඩක් වෙලාවට පාවිච්චි වෙන්නේ. right? ඒක නිසා අපිට ගැටලුවක් තියෙනවා generalize කරන්න. But anyway, generalizing is not a purpose of qualitative research. දැන් මෙතන කියනවා හරි වැදගත් කතාවක් මේ ඩික්‍රොප් කියන author, although the statistical generalization is not possible, analytical generalization is possible if the researcher offers details about context of the study and integrates the findings with the existing literature. right? එතකොට ඒක නිසා තමයි transferability කියන එක අපි යොදාගෙන තියෙන generalizability කියන එක වෙනුවට. whether we can apply our own research findings or transfer our findings to another context. or transfer කරනකොට බලන්න ඕනේ ඒ context එක අතර තියෙන වෙනස මොනවද? right? නුවරයි කොළඹයි අපි නිකන් හිතුවොත් එහෙම නුවර වෙච්ච දේවල් කොළඹ කරන්න පුළුවන්ද කියලා ඔය context එක ඒ transfer කරන කෙනා generalize කරන්න උත්සාහ කරන කෙනා නැත්නම් apply කරන්න උත්සාහ කරන කෙනා බලන්න ඕන where is the context that these findings were found and see if these contexts are matching. What are the contextual differences? And considering that, they can see whether the findings are transferable or not. right? අපිට කරන්න තියෙන දේවල් තමයි thick description කියන එක. Similar to the technique that we discussed under dependability. right? thick description කියලා කියන්නේ basically මම අර කලින් සඳහන් කරපු දේවල්මයි procedure එක වගේම more than the procedure context. right? Thickly describing the context so that your reader can understand the context better. right? That is what we do under the name of thick description. දැන් මම චූටි උදාහරණයක් කිව්වොත් මගේ රිසර්ච් එක ශ්‍රී ලංකන් context එකේ වෙනකොට ඒකේ examiners ලා reviewers ලා ගොඩක් වෙලාවට මේ කියවන අය ඉන්නේ foreign countries වල. එතකොට මට ලංකාව ගැන ලොකු විස්තරයක් කරන්න ඕන. ලංකාවේ මම කතා කරන දැන් විශේෂම උදාහරණයක් විදිහට ගත්තොත් ටුක් ටුක් ගැන කතා කරා. right? ඒකට ටුක් ටුක් කියන්නේ දැන් ගොඩක් රටවල ටුක් ටුක් නැහැනේ. ඒකට ටුක් ටුක් කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? ඒක ලංකාවේ ඔපරේට් වෙන්නේ කොහොමද? right? ඒකේ ඉන්න මිනිස්සු කොයි වගේද? ඒ කියන්නේ සාමාන්‍ය ස්වභාවය ගැන දල අවබෝධයක් වෙන්න ඕන. otherwise අපි දැන් ටුක් ටුක් experience එකක් ගැන ටුක් ටුක් එකක් දැකලවත් නැති අහලවත් නැති කෙනෙක්ට හිතා ගන්න බෑ what is this happening කියලා. right? ඒ වගේ මම සරල උදාහරණයක් ගත්තා. ඒ වගේ අපේ context එකේ තියෙන මේ ලක්ෂණ මොනවද කියන එක reader ට ලැබෙන සලස්සනවා දැනගන්න සලස්සනවා. එතකොට මේ contextual ඒක හරහා තමයි reader තේරුම් ගන්නේ what was happening in your research කියලා. right? එතකොට මේ context එක දැනගත්තොත් තමයි තව කෙනෙක්ට ඒක transfer කරන්න පුළුවන්ද කියලා තීරණය ගන්නත් හැකියාව තියෙන්නේ. Right. The last one is conformability. I will give you a minute to go through the slide, and I can have a quick break, like 1 minute. Okay. Okay. Someone has put a comment in Q&A that no sound suddenly here. Is it the case still? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Now all good, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Conformability is basically about objectivity, right? Which is again a huge challenge in qualitative research, right? Because under our philosophical assumptions, we assume and accept subjectivity, subjective reality, right? Anyway, it doesn't mean that we can say anything in qualitative research. Subjectivity accept කරනවා කියන එකෙන් අදහස් වෙන්නේ නැහැ අපිට subjectivity කියලා මම research කෙනෙක් නම් මට හිතෙන හැමදේම මගේ මේ subjective interpretation you have to accept that කියලා කියන්න හැකියාවක් නැහැ. right? ඒක නෙවෙයි ඇත්තටම our interpretation is subjective, but we have to try to be objective as much as possible. We have to take all measures possible to be objective in our analysis, right? Although we cannot avoid subjectivity, right? The neutrality. I hope you have read this. A degree of neutrality or extent to which the findings of a study are shaped by the respondents and not researcher bias, motivations or interest, right? Findings ටික shape වෙලා තියෙන්නේ research ට අවශ්‍ය විදියට. නැත්නම් research කියන දේ වලින් තමයි ඒක හැඩගැහිලා තියෙන්නේ. නමුත් sorry participants කියන විදියට තමයි ඒක හැඩගැහිලා තියෙන්නේ. නමුත් research ට ඕන විදියට නෙමෙයි. right? නමුත් අපි මෙතෙන්දී කතා කරන constructivist paradigm එකේ findings are co-constructed කියලා අදහසක්. right? ඒ කියන්නේ යම්කිසි අපි හිතමු ඉන්ටර්විව් එකක් කියලා. ඉන්ටර්විව් එකේදී අපි ප්‍රශ්න අහන්නේ අපි රිසර්චර් විදියට සහ ඒ අහන ටෝන් එක, මෝඩ් එක, ඒ හැම දෙයක්ම තීරණය වෙන්නේ රිසර්චර් සබ්ජෙක්ටිවිටි එක මත. right? සහ ඒක මත විතරක් නෙවෙයි අතර මේ දෙදෙනා තුළ ඇති වෙන සාකච්ඡාව ඒ ස්වභාවය මත. right? දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට මට recent example එකක් ආවේ research students ලා වගේ කතා කරනකොට මේ අපි අහපු දෙයට නෙමෙයි උත්තර දෙන්නේ නැත්නම් අපිට ඒ කියන්නේ අපේ අරමුණු වලට ගැලපෙන උත්තර නෙමෙයි හම්බ වුනේ කියලා. right? එතකොට මේ participants ලාගේ researcher අතර තියෙන rapport එක කොයිතරම් වැදගත්ද කියන එක එතනින් තේරෙනවා. ඒ rapport එකත් එක තමයි that will give the richness to your data. right? With that richness only that co-creation of data happens. right? ඒක ටිකක් වැඩිපුර කතාවක්. anyway subjectivity is there, of course, in the data collection and also in the analysis or the interpretation, but we have to take measures to avoid that. right? Let me repeat that analysis does not happen in a vacuum. Analysis or qualitative interpretation does not happen in a vacuum. right? ඒ vacuum එක පිරලා තියෙන්නේ අපේ subjectivity එකත් එක්ක. එතකොට ඒකම how to avoid that subjectivity is being open. right? Being open කියලා මිනිස්සු ගොඩාක් කියනවා තමයි. මම open මාර විවෘතයි කියලා. But we have to question. right? ඒක නිසා ඒක practice එකෙන් එන්න දෙයක් කියලා මම හිතනවා. මේ කියලා තරම් ලේසි නෑ කාට හරි විවෘත වෙන්න as human beings. So the process of analysis can be made objective by providing different explanations about phenomenon under study, providing different explanations, providing details as to how the major interpretations have been reached based on the data, right? As I told you, we move on different stages, move along different stages in the qualitative analysis, from data collections to transcribing, coding, categorizing, theming, right? Theoretical construction. මේ හැම එකක්ම තියෙනවා major steps. එතකොට turning points තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? එතකොට ඇයි අපි යමක් යම් කිසි විදිහකට ලේබල් කරන්නේ මොකක්ද ඒකට බලපාපු කාරණාව කියන වගේ දේවල් මේවා හරහා තමයි අපි basically qualitative research වලදී කියන්නේ in the analysis what happens is basically you elevate the level of abstractness in your analysis. You elevate the level of abstractness of your data. Right? Data ගොඩාක් තියෙනවා interview transcript වලට 25ක් තියෙනවා කියලා හිතමු, but you make your findings or take one findings into one page. Okay, so that means you basically through studying quality raw data you increase its level of abstractness, so you finally come up with abstract concepts or themes. Right? That is what basically happens. දැන් මෙහෙම එනකොට මේ themes label themes identification කරගන්නකොට සහ themes label කරනකොට අපේ biasness එන්න පුළුවන්. Right? ඒක නිසා මේ biasness හෝ අපි මොන why or how did you make this decision? Right? කොහොමද මම මේ තීරණය ගත්තේ? right? ඇයි මේ තීරණය ගත්තේ කියන එක කිව්වොත් එහෙම අන්න එතන කියවන කෙනාට තේරෙනවා මෙන්න මේ background information or backgrounds එක තමයි බලපාලා තියෙන්නේ මේ පුද්ගලයාට මේ conclusion එකට එන්න කියලා. That expose what do you call exposing basically. Right? Exposing you as a researcher is very, very important so that your audience can understand you well, plus and importantly your findings can be more and more trustworthy, right? So this point is about that major providing details as to how the major interpretations have been reached based on the data, and by reporting theoretically meaningful variables as මම කියපු දේවල්ම තමයි, right? ඒ දේවල් expose කරන්න ඕන. Thus the external auditor can the use of external auditor can enhance the conformability. මම නැවතත් කියන්න ඕන දැන් අපි techniques කතා කරා, credibility වලට වෙනම techniques වගේක්, defendability වලට වෙනම techniques, conformability එක වෙනම transferability වෙනම, right? ඒවා ඇත්තටම mutually exclusive නෙවෙයි. Remember that, right? The measures you can take to enhance conformability can also enhance the trustworthiness. I'm sorry, the credibility, right? ඒ වගේ අවස්ථා තියෙනවා. ඒක ගැන worry වෙන්න එපා. මොකද අපි කතා කරන්නේ fundamentally challenging දෙයක් ගැන. මොකද්ද fundamental challenge එක? To establish the trustworthiness in qualitative research. දැන් මේක quantitative mind එකෙන් බැලුවොත් එහෙම ලොකු gap එකක් තියෙනවා quantitative and qualitative trustworthiness එකේ. Right? ඔය ටික තමයි අපි 4 key measures විදිහට ගන්නෙ in establishing trustworthiness in qualitative research. Right? මෙතනත් අපි කතා කරපු දේවල්මයි නැවතත් තින්නේ. These techniques can be used to enhance the transferability, conformability rather. I'm sorry. Conformability audit කියන එක external audit එකක් දෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? එතකොට මම යම් කිසි findings ටිකක් හොයාගත්තට පස්සේ ඒ process එකම මම දෙනවා තව auditor කෙනෙක්ට, person කෙනෙක්ට, maybe the peer or anyone to audit the process, right? Whether there is a representation of the data in the findings, right? ඊට පස්සේ triangulation ගැන අපි කතා කරා. Triangulation එකේදී තියෙන්නේ you take multiple perspectives so that our whole perspective is enriched so that we do not miss something, right? And also we eliminate biasness as well. ඊට අමතරව මම කැමති මේ ටික තමයි අපි ඇත්තටම basically කතා කරන්නේ trustworthiness establishment එකේදී පාවිච්චි කරන්න පුළුවන් දේවල්. ඊට අමතරව මම කැමති තව slide එකක් මම add කරලා තියෙනවා with my experience and all I have to emphasize two words here that are very very important for trustworthiness of any sort of research. One is reflexivity, right? That I already talked about, right? It's an attitude of attending systematically to the context of knowledge construction, especially to the effect of the researcher at every step of the research process. Can you please read that, the first point? Reflexivity is an attitude of attending systematically to the text, to the context of the knowledge construction. In a research, what we do basically is we construct knowledge, right? එතකොට මොන context එකේ ඉඳලාද මම මේ නැත්නම් මම as a researcher මම researcher කෙනෙක් විදිහට මේ knowledge එක construct කරන්නේ මොන වගේ context මොන වගේ පසුබිමක ඉඳලාද, right? එතකොට ඒකට systematically attend වෙනවයි කියන එක තමයි reflexivity කියලා කියන්නේ. එතකොට look at the second part of the sentence, especially to the effect of the researcher, right? මොන වගේ තැන්වලදීද මගේ personal දේවල් මගේ research එක ඇතුළට රින් ගන්න පුළුවන් තැන් තියෙනවා. Especially to the effect of the researcher at every step of the research process. Right? එතකොට අපි තේරුම් ගන්න අපේ background එකයි, අපේ position එකයි, අපේ attitudes උයි, අපේ interpretation එකට බලපානවා. Right? Especially when you talk about some sensitive areas, right? අපි cultural ගත්තොත් එම් culture එකේ තියෙන ගොඩක් දේවල් sensitive. Right? Gender matters වෙන්න පුළුවන්, religion matters වෙන්න පුළුවන්, cultural issues වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? මේ හැම දෙයක් ගැනම කතා කරනකොට අපේ biasness එක එළියට පැනලා අර participants ලා කියපු දේවල් distort කරන්න පුළුවන්. Right? මේක ගැන ගොඩාක් පරිස්සම් වෙන්න ඕන qualitative research වල විශේෂයෙන්ම මොකද research එකක් කියලා කියන්නේ responsible වැඩක්. Constructing knowledge, adding a contribution, adding something to the knowledge, exchanging knowledge base is should be taken as highly responsible. Right? Highly responsible. මොකද ඒක දැන් ඔයාලා දන්නවා අපි තුම අපි කරන publication එකක් හරි ඒක publish වුණාට පස්සේ ඒක cite කරනවා මිනිස්සු ඒක that is treated as scientific knowledge. Right? ඒක නිකන් මගේ opinion එකක් නෙවෙයි scientific knowledge එක විදිහට treat වෙන්නේ. So people can cite it, right? Take it as example and spread the message. Everything happens. So therefore, it is our we have to take responsibility about what we do by the name of research. එතකොට reflexivity කියන එක හරියට හොඳට මතක තියාගන්න. ඊට පස්සේ responsibility කියන එක මෙතෙන්දී මම emphasize කරන්න කැමති මම දැක්ක එක්තරා workshop එකකුත් මේකේ අන්තිමට තියෙනවා academic integrity කියන එක සම්බන්ධයෙන් ඒකත් මේ trustworthiness එකට ගොඩාක් සම්බන්ධ වෙන තැන් තියෙනවා. වෙනම කතා කරන්න පුළුවන් topic එකක් but when it comes to trustworthiness, right? ගොඩක් තැන්වල අපි දන්නවා data fabrication, right? Cooking data තමන්ගේ අතින් දාලා සමහරව ඉන්නවා ගෙදරට වල ඉඳන්ම ඉන්ටර්වයුව ප්‍රශ්නෙත් අහන්නේ එයා උත්තරේ දෙන්නෙත් එයා ඒකල්ලා පබ්ලිෂින් කරලා වෝඩ්ස් අරගෙන ඒවා මෙව කරලා පොසිෂන්ස් අරගෙන ඉන්න අය ඉන්නවා සමාජයේ, right? ඒතකොට එතන තියෙන ඩේන්ජර් එක තමයි you something not real to the existing knowledge, right? ඒක යථාර්ථයේ තියෙන දෙයක් නෙමෙයි අපි පබ්ලිෂ් කරලා සයිට් කරලා ඒවා මෙව කරන්නේ, right? එතකොට මෙන්න මේ පැති ගැන විශේෂයෙන්ම මම හිතන්නේ responsible conduct of research is a kind of a phrase that academia has been paying attention to. I think it should be highly emphasized, right? Even a small matter that is no problem, but you have to be genuine in your conduct of research. That is very important, right? අපිට දැන් data තියෙනවා මෙහෙම මෙච්චර ගාණක් data collect කරා quantitative වෙන්න පුළුවන් qualitative වෙන්න පුළුවන් ඒක present කරන්න පුළුවන් බැරි කමක් නැහැ, right? But it is our ethical conduct of research that matters, right? And also responsible conduct of research, right? එතන මොකද වෙන්නේ අපි science කියලා produce කරන්නේ බොරුවක්. මේක අන්තිමට මුළු ඒ කියන්නේ scientific community එකටම කරන හානියක් කියලා මම හිතන්නේ. ඊට පස්සේ plagiarism ගත්තොත් එහෙම, right? ඊට පස්සේ personal grudges මතුවෙන්න පුළුවන් research හරහා, right? harassment වෙන්න පුළුවන්, පලි ගන්න පුළුවන් නේද? සුපර්වයිසර්ගෙන් පලි ගන්න පුළුවන්, ස්ටුඩන්ට්ගෙන් සලි ගන්න පුළුවන්, එක්සැමිනර්ස්ලාගෙන් පලි ගන්න, මේ වගේ දේවල් සමාජයේ වෙනවා. right? එතකොට ඒ දේවල් avoid කරගන්න එකත් අපේ මේ trustworthiness කියන එකටම සම්බන්ධයි. Because what happens basically in that case is that your research is not judged based on your methodological approach, but personal judgments. Right? That is the thing that should not happen. Right? Methodologically තමයි research එකක් judge වෙන්න ඕනේ. right? ඒක නැතුව වෙන වෙන දේවල් වෙනවා කියලා කියන්නේ misjudgments එන්න පුළුවන්. right? ඒක නිසා plagiarism විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ වගේ දේවල් respect, right? The other authors, people who have contributed to the knowledge, right? That is very important. So therefore, overall, we have to avoid research misbehaviors, right? And questionable research practices. And basically politics of research අපි කතා කරනවා මේක එක එක level වලින් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, institutional level එකේ තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, public level එකේ තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, එන්න ගොඩක් තියෙනවා. ඒ කෙසේ වෙතත් මේ හැම දෙයක්ම trustworthiness කියන එකට බලපානවා. මම ඒක අමතර කාරණයක් ඇත්තටම එකතු කරේ අපේ අත්‍යවශ්‍ය trustworthiness කියන කොටසට වඩා අපි neglect කරන කොටසක් trustworthiness එකේ. right? විශේෂයෙන්ම reflexivity and responsible conduct of research and academic integrity වගේ දේවල්. They are very, very important in terms of giving a valid contribution to the existing knowledge base. Right? So with that, I'm going to wind up. I'm sorry that there can be references that are not included in the list because I have been through a power failure since last evening. So I just found power just to manage this speech or the presentation rather. Do you have any questions? No questions in the Q&A? And I would like to be that I was able to make sense of trustworthiness at least. I know this is kind of area that is difficult to digest as well because mostly, I assume mostly you are from quantitative background. Anyway, please refer to those references and you have also, of course, a lot of sources to read. And attain trustworthiness whenever you do qualitative research. That is very, very important. And with that, I'm going to thank once again to Professor Ushan Peiris and the team of the Department of Accountancy and Finance. And I took a great pleasure in being part of this. I, of course, have stopped a little earlier as well. So you can take a break or anything that I think Professor Ushan can use that time. Thank you once again. Professor Ushan, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you, Sarat sir, for your wonderful delivery on this, trustworthiness on qualitative research. So, so from the department, so we thank you a lot. So, Lakshmi, is there any formal vote of thank?
Yes, sir. Sir, if Sarat sir will wait until the last moment, I can deliver the vote of thanks at the end. If sir was not able to be at the meeting for the last time, I can have it now, sir.
No worries, no worries. You can deliver at the end. I'll join later towards the end.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
Okay, sure, sir.
faculty now. I need to go to the residence now, and there I'll join.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, once again, you all are welcome to the next part of this, validity and reliability session. So, Sarasa conducted the trustworthiness or as the validity aspect in this qualitative research arena, research field. So hereafter, so I take the battle to continue this validity and reliability part in quantitative research. So when it comes to quantitative research, this validity and reliability is very, very important. So without valid instruments, without reliable outputs, you might not be able to, conclude your research findings in a better way. So therefore, these two pillars are considered as very, very important when it comes to the quantitative research, right? So normally, if you look at these two, so no one will, care your findings. No one will consider your findings as important if someone doubts its validity and the reliability. So that is why we say, right? So normally in quantitative research, we say always we have to minimize the bias. Now, since there are some students from other departments, so I suddenly add 2 or 3 slides that talks about the bias. So as Sarasa mentioned, bias is something that we have to eliminate, especially in quantitative research. So when it comes to biasness, so we can define it as bias occurs when there is a systematic deviation from the truth due to errors in study design, data collection, analysis, and interpretation. Very, very important, right? So this bias can initially come when you collect your data, right? Selection biases. For instance, you might select a bad sample. You might select an inappropriate sample. You might have selected a non-representative sample. So all these, selective biases would lead to data collection issues. Sometimes study design is not acceptable. So now you know what do you mean by study design. For example, so we can consider your conceptual framework. That is also a design that you use in your research. So all these things actually discussed by our previous presenters, the importance of conceptual framework, the importance of data collection. So likewise, all these things were actually explained in detail. But in my part, so I just, give you a recap, right? Study design. So you should design your study based on a theoretical framework, right? Or else you must at least use the empirical framework, right? So those are the two main, background for your research design. Based on those two concepts, you decide the research design. So you might not be able to, include variables, conceptualizations, hypotheses, right? As and when you want, right? So all these, inclusions into your design should be backed by some theoretical aspect or by some empirical aspects. So that is why, we say in general, when you do a quantitative research, you will go with thousands of selections, maybe thousands and thousands of selections. Each and every selection should be justified. So if you can do that, what you can do? So if you can justify each and every selection that you go with in your research study, so that means you have eliminated the bias for a good extent. That means you have ensured the validity and reliability in your research for a greater extent. So Lamai, please remember what I said. So you will go with thousands and thousands of selections. You will select the sample, you will select the sampling frame, you will select the population, you will select the analysis tool, you will select the objectives, you will select the hypotheses. So there can be thousands of selections. If you can justify those selections either by using a theory or either by using some empirical studies, so that means you have fairly minimize the bias and assure the validity and reliability. So as I said earlier, bias can appear in any form of these four, right? Study design biases, data selection biases, data collection biases, and analysis biases. So that is very, very important in quantitative research. So what do you mean by this analysis biases? So normally how you detect these analysis biases, especially in quantitative research. So normally we can understand out of 4 situations these analysis biases. So normally, let's say you are hypothesizing a positive relationship, right? That is your theoretical hypothesis. That is your empirical expectation from the research. You're expecting a, let's say, positive relationship in between 2 variables. But at the end of the day, you are getting, once you analyze your data, you are getting a negative relationship. Something totally different from you hypothesize. That can happen. That is perfectly okay. That can happen. But if you cannot justify why it is negative, I hypothesize a positive one. Now, my result says it has a negative thing. So if you can justify, then it is okay. But if you can't justify, right, the inverse result, that means that may be due to a bias, right? That unexpected result may be due to a bias. Vice versa. Vice versa means you are expecting a negative relationship, but your data says a positive relationship. That is also considered as a bias if you cannot justify the unexpected result, right? Third case, you are expecting a significant relationship. You are expecting a statistically significant relationship. But when it comes to the reality, when it comes to the data set, the relationship is insignificant. That is, once again, perfectly okay. Issue comes when you cannot justify that unexpected result. So likewise, Lamai, now you can understand there are 4 instances where you can understand a possible bias in your quantitative research, right? So when you are expecting a negative relationship, data sets, it's a positive one, vice versa. When you are expecting a significant relationship, data says a insignificant one, vice versa. So those are the 4 instances we can consider in quantitative research as biases. So all are considered as bias if you cannot justify, if you cannot validate the unexpected result, right? So then let's see, when it comes to this analysis bias, so on what circumstances, on what situations we would get a bias result. That is really important. So I used to explain these things in my econometric class for our finance and BI students, but since there are students from BM and other departments, so let me take 2-3 minutes just to give them a brief understanding on that. So on what circumstances these analysis biases put you in trouble, right? So first one, where is my pen? Okay, the first case is when you see endogeneity in your research. Endogeneity issue. This is considered as an issue which leads to bias in your result. So we know that endogeneity can appear, endogeneity issue can appear because of 3 main reasons. First main reason is when you have a misspecified model. Misspecified model. Even for the finance student, these things are very important because these are the instances of validity and reliability. I will come to that part later. So then you will realize the importance of, understanding these concepts, right? So endogeneity can first appear because of misspecified models. if you cannot maintain the validity in your model, mainly the content validity, right? So this misspecification appears because of misspecifications, misspecified models. If the model specification is not complete, if the model specification do not capture all the important variables into the equation. Now, for instance, so let me take a simple example. Now, let's say I want to develop a model to understand the determinants of economic growth, right? So your objective is to understand determinants of economic growth. So in that case, you should include all the possible significant determinants as regressors, as independent variables, right? So if you could not include a very important regressor into the model that you are using, that misspecification can lead to a bias, can lead to this endogeneity issue, resulting a biased result. So therefore, you should not use misspecified models. Always you have to go with well-specified models. So then we discuss, so how we can go for well-specified models. What are the good practices available? Very, very important, right? So when you develop a model, right, before analyzing, first you will have to develop the model, specify the model, understand the equation, right? So there you can use some good practices. First of all, you can include theoretical variables. You can borrow some variables from various theories. What are the relevant theories, right? So that is the importance of theoretical review under your literature review, right? Through the theoretical review, you can understand the important theoretical variables. Right now, in my example, so you can consider so many economic growth development theories. From those theories, you can borrow some variables. Like if you take the production function or Cobb-Douglas function or the Solo model, so we can say fiscal capital, human capital, technology are the most important regressors, determinants of economic growth. So not only that, so you can consider some other theories, integration theories, endogenous economic growth theory. So likewise, you can consider all those theories and borrow some variables from those theories into your model, right? That is the first thing you have to consider, right? Borrow variables from theories. Then you can borrow variables from empirical studies. Apart from these theoretical variables, some researchers might have taken some other variables into their models. So what they propose, so you have to go and read recent research relevant to your objectives, relevant to the area that you study. So when you read recent research, previous research, so you can borrow some other important variables. That is a must. And the next thing, what we used to say is include context-specific variables. Context means it can be time context, it can be the geographical context, right? So in general, when you develop a model in quantitative research, so you should think about 3 types of variables in the model development process. What are the theoretical variables? What are the empirical variables? And what are the context-specific variables? So later, when I talk about this validity and reliability, I will explain, right? So what phenomena that and reliability. So keeping that to later, I will continue the forms of endogeneity. Instances where you might see the endogeneity. You would see endogeneity first thing when there is a misspecified model. If you have missed, if you have not taken a very important variable into the model, that might lead to endogeneity. So the next thing is if you have misspecified proxies, right? If you have misspecified proxies, if you fail to maintain the construct validity, for instance, if you have misspecified proxies in your model, if the variables that you have taken into the model, right, do not measure what you actually want to measure, right? If the variable that you have taken into the model, if it is not measuring what you actually want to measure with that variable, so then there we call it is a misspecified variable or misspecified proxy. So that is the second case, misspecified proxies. So remember that. And then, so if you see duality in your model, duality means, now let's say you have a dependent variable and an independent variable. My dependent variable, let's say GDP. So I regress it with, let's say, fiscal investments, or else, let's say my independent variable is investments, right? So in my research, I hypothesize investment significantly influences the GDP. That is my research objective, and accordingly, I develop this simple linear regression model. Now I say dependent variable, that is GDP, following my objective, and independent variable is investments, because I want to research how this investment, to what extent these investments influence the GDP. So in that case, if you look at the objective, my dependent variable is GDP, independent variable is investments. That is perfectly okay according to your hypothesis, right? But a fair reader might also say, look, there is a possibility of, this GDP influencing the investments as well. The amount that you can invest depends on the GDP that you have, right? The amount that you can invest in your fiscal assets and everything depends on the current levels of GDP. So therefore, we can see bidirectional relationship in between these two variables. Independent variable influences the GDP theoretically, and in the same time, this GDP, the dependent variable, also influences the independent variable. Very crucial situation. So most of our students do not recognize this when they propose their models, right? So if this appears in your research model, it doesn't mean that you have to throw it out, no, right? Still you can go with that research, keeping that in mind. So there is a potential duality in my research. So when I select analysis tools, right, I should consider that one, right? So that is once again about the construct validity, right? So when I talk about construct validity, I will further explain these things. But at the moment, I'm talking about the instances where that one might doubt endogeneity in your results, right? So endogeneity is not a good thing. It's an issue that you have to, initially solve, right? Before go and, analyze your data, you will have to go and observe once you develop the model. When you develop the model, you will have to go and observe before go and data collecting, before go and, analyzing the results, before go and interpreting your results. So these things you have to observe in order to ensure the validity, right? So whether my model specification would lead to this endogeneity issue. So there you will have to think about, is it a misspecified model? Have I taken all the important variables? Or is it a well-specified model? If it is a well-specified model, so you can go to the next. what are the variables that I have? Am I using proxies? Are the proxies representing what I want to represent with the measurement? Then you can go and observe. Is my model suffering from duality? If it is yes, then you will have to think about the proper analysis tools later. Right? So that is the first case where you see endogeneity issue. So these three, of course, cases would lead to a biased result if you are a quantitative researcher. Right? Then the next important case of bias in quantitative research is, right, use of inappropriate analysis tools. Right? Professor Munasinghe very clearly conducted that particular workshop previously, I think last Wednesday. Right? So he clearly mentioned the importance of using correct instruments for the correct insights. So if you want to get correct insights means unbiased, reliable insights. If you want to get valid and reliable results, it is really, really important to select the most appropriate tool to analyze your data. Right? So as he very correctly mentioned in the workshop, there can be so many tools available for you to go and use. Right? Out of those tools, you will have to select the appropriate ones. Right? I remember he mentioned, right? So we have three, if you go to the descriptive statistics, for instance, right? We have three averages, mean, median, mode. Normally our people regard them as three different calculations. Yes, the way that you calculate them is different, but they give you the same meaning of average, right? So how are you going to use them? If your data set is normally distributed, you have to use mean to represent the average. Otherwise, if your data set is skewed, either negatively or positively skewed, there you will have to use either the median or mode, right, as your analysis tool. So when you run correlations coefficient, so how you select? Most of the time I have seen whatever the data measures that you have, whether they are continuous data, whether they are discrete data, whether they are ratio level data, whether they are ordinal data, it doesn't matter. Our students use only the Pearson's correlation coefficient. That is wrong. You cannot do so. That is not good, right? That leads to invalid results, inconsistent results. There you violate the validity and reliability by way of bad choices when it comes to the data analysis tools, right? Depending on the nature of the measurement of your data, you will have to select the correct tool, right? So if it is a continuous data set, and if the data set is normally distributed, you can easily use Pearson's correlation coefficient, right? If it is a discrete data, and if it is not normal distributed, the recommended method is Spearman's correlation coefficient. And if you have orderly data, like, so when we use Likert scale, right, most of our students use these question areas with Likert scale questions to collect our research data, right? So in that case, are you allowed to use this either the Pearson or Spearman? No, you are not. You will have to use Candlestone B. Even you can go for Candlestone A or C, but the most appropriate one there is when you have orderly data, when you have ranked data, you should use Candlestone B. So we have to be aware of those tools, right? You have to be aware, right? So if you don't know these tools, you will have to go and search what are the alternative options available for me to get this particular result out of these variables. it is your responsibility as a quantitative researcher. You must aware about the alternatives available to you. So then only you can go for a correct choice. So I told you earlier at the very beginning, as a quantitative researcher, you will go for thousands of selections, right? Each and every selection should be justified. Otherwise, examiners, readers will doubt about the validity and reliability of your result, right? Mainly they will say, look, you have not used the correct tool here, so your results are biased. That means there is an issue regarding the validity and reliability. So therefore, Lamai, the analysis tool selection is also equally important, right? It is also equally important. Like you develop the model, you might have a well-specified model. You might have a model with very good proxies. You might have a model with no duality, but still your results can get biased if you use an inappropriate analysis tool, right? That is important. So then interpretation. So even the Dr. Sarat mentioned, right? Some people interpret the results, only the positive results, only the results that, improve the quality of your research. No, it doesn't mean in that way, right? Only the risk. Now, some people interpret only the favorable results, right? As they think. Even the other negative results are also, of course, your research findings. So you should interpret them as well. So if you are interpreting your results with the purpose of, publishing your results in a good journal, sometimes you might ignore the negative side of your, results. That is not good. Whatever it is that you have as the results, you will have to interpret them. Otherwise, we consider that as a biased interpretation, right? So those are the instances of bias, general occurrences, right? So I hope that is clear. Okay, now, as I told you, this biasness can lead to invalid results. In the same time, biasness can lead to unreliable results. So therefore, first of all, you will have to control the bias in your study, right? Control the bias. So if you can control the bias, that means for a certain level, you have, ensured the validity and reliability in your research. Okay, with that note, let me go to the main point. The validity. What is validity? The degree to which an instrument measures what it intended to measure, right? You might use so many instruments in your research, right? Sometimes you will use questionnaires, that is an instrument. You might use variables, that is an instrument. Direct variables. You might use a proxy variable, that is an instrument. You might use an analysis tool, that is an instrument, right? So all these instruments should have the ability in giving you whatever the thing that you expected correctly. Otherwise, that instrument fails to maintain the validity in your research, right? So their main, we concentrate on the accuracy of your results, right? So we can identify three types of, validities: construct validity, content validity, and criterion related validities. So let's see what are they. Okay, before that, let's have go through on this reliability definition. The degree to which instrument yields a consistent result under consistent conditions, right? So whether the instruments that you use are capable of in giving you consistent results. So there we concentrate on the consistency under reliability. Under validity, we concentrated on the accuracy of your results. Here, under reliability, we are worried about the consistency of the results. So under reliability, we do talk about 3 types of reliabilities, that is test, retest reliability, internal consistency reliability, and the third one is iterator reliability. Okay, let's move on. So I will be explaining these components of validity and reliability over 3 examples, right? So first example is from educational research. So that particular researcher wants to see the effectiveness of a mathematics paper, right? A mathematics test to assess the high school students' mathematical ability. So here, there in that particular research, he uses an instrument. What is that? The mathematical paper, right? That is the instrument. There he uses to check the high school students' mathematical ability, right? And in the second example, I'm focusing on economic research. That is, there we use determinants of economic growth in Sri Lanka. Very simple research, right? All of you can understand. Third one, a survey on determinants of employee job satisfaction, right? In the first case, the instrument is a questionnaire, right? In the second case, it may be a macroeconomic model where you use secondary data, right? Third case may be a survey. You might use a questionnaire, right? So let's see in all these 3 cases, how you maintain the validity and reliability in your research. Okay, let me first move into the first component of validity, that is construct validity. So let's see the meaning. Are we measuring the theoretical construct accurately? Right? So when you propose a research, when you propose a research objective, right? So there you hypothesize a certain theoretical construct, right? So then you will have to check whether the instruments that I use has the potential in delivering the expected outcomes for that particular construct, right? Okay, let's move in to the examples and see the meanings. In the first case, the mathematical test case, what is the construct and what you want to do with that? Construct, the instrument, is my mathematical paper. With that, what you want to know? With that, you want to know the mathematical knowledge of these students, whether they are capable in mathematics. Now, it is a broader case, right? So when it comes to mathematics, there are so many pillars, so many domains in mathematics, like algebra, geometry, logic, creativity, so many things. So therefore, you will have to make sure in your questions paper, you include questions for each of these pillars, each of these domains in mathematics. Otherwise, your questionnaire, the instrument, will not give you the expected result. What is your expected result? What you want to measure? Whether the students are capable in mathematics, in general mathematics. You don't want to check whether they are capable in algebra. That is not the case, right? So you want to know in general whether they are good in mathematics. So then you should include all the domains of mathematics into the questions paper. You should not limit it just to either algebra or geometry, right? So if that is the case, your instrument is not valid. So if your questions paper includes only algebra type questions, so it doesn't tell, right, that the student is good in geometry or logic, right? So some part of mathematics is okay, is tested. That means your instrument is not complete. So it doesn't have the potential in satisfying your objective. So there is a significant construct validity issue. So if you did not include all these domains of mathematics as questions into your questions paper. So hope that is clear, right? So then we can go to the next example, determinants of economic growth. So there you might use so many constructs, right? So many variables. Let's say, for instance, right? First, let's take a variable as a construct, right? So in this process, you think the first variable that you might use, determinants of economic growth, right? Obviously, the economic growth, right? Economic growth. Then you will have to go and understand what is the scope of this particular variable according to my research object. And what are the determinants of economic growth, right? So now let's say you want to know the determinants of economic growth. Now, when you see, economic growth data, right, you might see some people have used GDP growth, sometimes per capita GDP. There are so many options. Then depending on the nature of your research, let's say I have 3 options now, GDP variable, GDP growth variable, I have per capita GDP. Then which one should I select? Which one should I select? That selection decides the validity, construct validity in your research. It seems like very easy when it comes to GDP, right? It's a real variable. It's a direct variable. You have data. But still, you will have to ensure the construct validity. The selection there you made should backed by the theoretical expectation in your model, in your hypothesis, in your research, right? Now, for instance, here my research objective is to understand the determinants of economic growth. So then can I use per capita GDP? No, you cannot. Per capita GDP do not talk about the economic growth, but it talks about something else. Then I have 2 options, GDP growth and GDP. Which one should I use? Still you have a question, right? Still you have a choice to make, whether it is GDP or GDP growth. Then once again, you will have to think about the construct validity. Now, let's say, for instance, my other variables, theoretical variables are human capital, fiscal capital, technology. So I used these variables following the Cobb-Douglas production function, or else following Solo model, right? So if you have, used operations management like subjects previously, you know the meaning of this Cobb-Douglas function. The nature of the Cobb-Douglas function. Okay, let me write the Solo model straight away. Solo model assumes this sort of relationship, right? It assumes, let's say, economic growth. I put GDP. It assumes it has a function of, let's say, I use K for fiscal capital following Solo, H for human capital, and A for technology. These are the 3 main economic growth trajectories according to Solo. He says the influence of fiscal capital on GDP is this sort of function, K to the power of alpha. The impact that human capital brings to GDP is H to the power of 1 minus alpha. Right? And in between these two, what we have? a dot. That means what? A multiplication sign. So this is the solo model. This is the theoretical construct. This is what? It is the theoretical construct. Now, if you look at this particular theory, now what it proposes? It proposes, yes, GDP is a function of fiscal capital, human capital, and technology, right? And go and see what sort of function there you see. Is it a linear function? No, it's not a linear function, right? It's a quadratic function. But with our analysis tools like multiple linear regression, maybe some other advanced OLS models, always we use under the assumption of linearity and additivity, right? So when you use OLS models like multiple linear regression, we assume there is a linear relationship in between GDP and human capital, in between GDP and fiscal capital, right? But actually, when it comes to theory, what you see, totally different thing, right? Now, for instance, so if I develop my regression model like this, I take GDP as my dependent variable equals beta 0. This is how normally we develop the regression models, right? Plus beta 1. Let's say I put K here. And plus, then I put rest of the variables. So what is the construct? First construct I have used in my regressors, K, fiscal capital. Now, if I use it in this way, have I ensured the construct validity? Just think. If I use this fiscal capital variable in my multiple linear regression model in this way. Now, I proudly say, you see, I borrowed this particular variable from Solo. It's a theory. It's a theoretical variable. When you develop a regression model for GDP, you must include it. So I argue in that way. But the examiner would say, yes, that is true. But Daru, you have failed to maintain the construct validity there. What? What is construct validity? Are we measuring the theoretical construct accurately? Go and see the theoretical construct. Go and see the theory as Sarala. It says there is a nonlinear relationship in between GDP and fiscal capital. But here you are hypothesizing, you have taken it as a linear relationship. Now here you are saying, as and when you increase K, fiscal capital, by 1 rupee, GDP will increase by beta 1 times. But is it the theory? No, theory says something else. Theory says GDP is an exponential function of K. Right? It says, theory says GDP is an exponential function of K. Right? So therefore, at the moment, you have not taken the variable in the correct way. So this regression equation violates the construct validity, therefore. Then how to correct it? How to correct it? So now how you can convert this theoretically given nonlinear relationship into a linear relationship? Take the first derivation. Take the first derivation. So once you take the first derivation, right? So this nonlinear relationships will become linear, right? And still, they are bringing a multiplicative effect in between what you can see. Multiple sign. But you are saying the next variable, beta 2, H, human capital. So in between you are taken in your model the plus sign. But in the theory, what you see? Multiplicative effect. You are taking it as an additive effect. Totally different. Once again, you are not validating the construct validity here. So you will have to consider both of these, right? First of all, you will have to convert. You will have to take the first derivation. As soon as you take the first derivation, this level values will become growth values, growth of GDP, growth of fiscal capital, growth of human capital, likewise. Then to account for this multiplicative effect, so you can convert the original model, theoretical model, into logarithmics. In logarithmics, what you say? Multiplication equals to summation plus sign, right? So that's why you see people take ln GDP growth, beta 1 times ln k hat, ln h hat in their models. So now when we look at this model, now it looks okay. Now there is a proper match in between the theoretical construct and the variable that you have taken into the model, right? Earlier, unknowingly this particular scenario, I have not account for the construct validity in my model. So these things are very, very important. These things looks like very simple, but if you forget these things in your research, definitely the results are biased, get biased. They can get biased, right? That is not good. If you want to go for a valid result, so construct validity is something that you will have to ensure in your research, right? So this is where you have, direct variables like GDP, fiscal capital, human capital, right? But what if when it comes to the technology? Can you find a variable for technology? If you Google, or even if you go to the World Bank data, Central Bank data, you might not see a data set that represents the level of technology, right? There you will have to use proxies, a proxy variable, right? So when you select proxies, you have to be very careful, right? So it should have the potential in readily representing the information content of the original variable. Now my original variable is technology. So if I can't find a direct data set for technology, I will have to go and find a proxy. So for that, of course, you can, use previous studies. You can validate the selection of proxies by citing some previous good research articles. So most of the time, what we see is researchers use research and development expenditure, a country's research and development expenditure to represent the technology. So then, of course, you will have to go and see, is that okay for my context? Does the research and development expenditure do readily reflect the level of technology we use, right? Even though other researchers use it, even though other researchers in other contexts in developed regions, right, most of the researchers use research and development expenditure to represent the technology in their countries. Now, what do you think? Is it applicable to my country? I have a doubt. Right? Because if you go and see, most of the time, you can find data for the like years like 20 previous decade, right? So if you go and see, so very insignificant amount has been allocated for research and development by the government. right? So if the budgetary allocation is not significant, so does it mean the level of technology that we use is not significant? No, that's not true. That is not true, right? Even though, right? Even though our government is not allocating much on research and development, still we are using some, considerable level of technology. Because if you can't, as a developing country, if you don't have the wealth in allocating for research and development, so you will have to look for other means of, acquiring new technology, right? So there are other forms of, acquiring new technology by way of, sometimes for indirect investments. Likewise, there are so many other theoretical models are there that talks about technology transmission. So sometimes our people might use them, right? We have evidences for those cases, right? So if you don't use good technology, right, how our manufacturing sector survives in the international trade, right? If you want to survive in international trade, even for a very small portion, so you should have very comparative capacity. You should continually increase your quality while maintaining the price, or sometimes by reducing the price. Continuously increase the quality by maintaining the price. Is that possible without new technology? I don't think so, right? Our people are competing in the international market. So that means they are capable of, increasing the quality continuously while maintaining the price. That means they are using new technology, right? So they might have, obtained those new technology by some other ways and means, right? So therefore, I don't think that research and development expenditure is a good proxy for the Sri Lankan context. So if that is the case, so you will have to think about if it is not a good proxy, if it violates the construct validity, then what is the variable that I can use that suits for the context that you address? So Lamai, so what I mean here is, right, do not depend everything on the previous researchers. So our people say, sometimes the students say, right, so not only me, look, other researchers also have used this variable to represent my original variable. So therefore, I'm also using it, right? Okay, that is okay. But you will have to make sure that selection is valid for the context as well. When it comes to context, it can be the geographical context or it can be the time context. So both very, very important, right? So that is about the construct validity when you do this sort of, research by using secondary data, right? Then if you take the other third research, now they will use a questionnaire to collect data. So they are also very, very important, right? You will have to maintain the construct validity. So you might have several variables like satisfaction here. Satisfaction is the construct. Maybe they want to understand the determinants of satisfaction. So satisfaction is one of the constructs. Then how to maintain the construct validity? First of all, as a good practice, what we say, right? You will have to first understand the scope of the variable, right? For that, you will have to read theories. What do you mean by satisfaction in this particular scenario? You will have to decide the scope of the variable, right? Then, of course, you will have to dig into that scope and see what are the important components that you observe inside that particular scope. You have first decide the scope. Thereafter, as the step number 2, dig into that scope and see what are the important elements, what are the important characteristics, what are the important components that you see in that particular scope, right? So all these important characteristics should back by a theory or theories, right? So after understanding the important characteristics, to represent each of the characteristics, you can include some questions. So if there are 5 components, right, to represent each of the component, you have to introduce at least 2-3 questions. So that is how you develop the question area, right? So if there are such 5-6 variables, for each of the variables, you will have to do that. Right? So you have to make sure all the theoretical components have been covered with my question area. Right? That is how you maintain the construct validity. Right? Then how to test this? Right? Now, is it practical? Yes, that is the proper steps that you have to follow. But when it comes to practice, under our undergraduate level, most of our students, what they do borrow through the 2-3 standard questions, right? Standard questions from previous researchers. And they have to observe the questions that they have used, right? So by observing 2-3 questions, question areas, and their questions relevant to this particular variable, so you can understand, roughly, this is the scope that previous researchers have, decided for their research. Is that okay for me also? Right? If not, you will have to go for some more question areas, standard question areas, and collect them, read them, understand the scope that they have considered. So then you can, repeat it in your context as well. Then go and see what are the main elements that they have considered. So what are the questions they have used to represent those elements? And accordingly, you can develop your question area also, right? So by following all these good practices, let's say we developed the question area for the case number 3. But still, it doesn't guarantee the construct validity. Still, it doesn't guarantee, right? So still, right, you will have to do a pilot survey and debug the question area. Debugging question area means what? Right? Still there can be, even though you practiced some good practices, even though you borrowed these questions, even though you decided the scope of these variables by using some standard question areas, even though you borrowed these questions from those standard questions, still there can be some issues, right? There can be some leading questions. Answer for one question might lead to another. There can be some scope overlappings. When you have 2-3 variables, the scope of these variables might overlap, right? There can be some there can be some wording issues, right? Sometimes when the respondents read your questions, they might not understand what you mean by the question. There can be some double meanings in your questions. So likewise, even though you do practice these good practices, still there can be so many issues in your question area, right? So that's why we always recommend to do a pilot survey and debug the question area by using fact analysis. So when you have these instruments with you, so why you don't use them, right? So if you want to go for a valid and reliable result, so we have to follow these things, these steps, right? Construct validity is a very, very important thing, right? So you can ensure the construct validity, right? So by using fact analysis, if you are using a question area as your data collection instrument, right? That is by doing a pilot survey, right? So if time permits, no, today I will use a question area and debug it, right? Only if time permits. Right, that is about construct validity, right? I think I explained all these 3 examples, right? So if you have any questions, you can, send them through Q&A session. So next I go to the other point, right? When it comes to the other point in the sense, still the construct validity, right? So as I told you earlier, when it comes to construct validity, not only about the variables, not only about the question areas and the instruments, it is once again about the analysis tool selection, right? So after developing your model, let's say I take the a survey-based research, right? So now it says, you see, the tool, the data collection instrument, what you use is a question area with Likert scale questions. So if you use the question area with Likert scale questions, so the data that you get are actually orderly data, right? So if you have orderly data, you cannot use this Pearson's correlation coefficient to measure the correlation, right? So what is the recommended tool? As I told you earlier, is the Candle's Tau-B. So likewise, the selection of tool is very, very important, right? So then in the case of other research, determinants of economic growth, right? So after developing the model, you will have to observe, right? What is the nature of relationship? What sort of impact human capital carries to the GDP? What sort of effect fiscal capital carries to the GDP? What sort of effect technology carries to the GDP? What sort of effect other variables do carry to the GDP? Is it a static effect or is it a dynamic effect? Depending on that, you will have to select the models. So if it is a static effect, so you can go with these multiple linear regression models, no issue. If the theoretical relationship is a static relationship. Otherwise, normally we know when it comes to these GDP models, the relationship is not static but dynamic. Even the previous period values of human capital, previous period values of fiscal investment, previous period investments on technology can influence current values of GDP. So therefore, the relationship structure is dynamic. So accordingly, you will have to select the analysis tools. Right? You might use multivariate dynamic time series models like VA and ECM there. Right? But still, you will have to justify. You will have to justify the appropriateness of the selection tool. Right? If your examiner, says, no, that is not the most appropriate tool. If there are some other, tools that is, available, so then he might doubt about the construct validity. He might say, look, the instrument that you use do not provide the expected results. It doesn't have the capacity in giving you the theoretically expected result. Right? So those are some instances of bias, right? So if your model, if your research fails to maintain the construct validity, whatever the type of data that you use, whatever the nature of your study, right? Your examiners might tell you, look, your data suffers from bias. So we cannot accept it. You will have to correct it then, right? So therefore, while you do your research, focus on this construct validity. It is very, very important. Okay, with that note, let me go to the next component of validity, that is content validity. right? Content validity. Does the instrument capture the full scope of the construct? So once again, I go back to my example number 1, mathematics test. So I'm planning to give a mathematics paper to evaluate the mathematical knowledge of my students, right? So then what is content validity? So there you will have to look at, you will have to make sure to include all the questions from all the areas of your syllabus, from the syllabus, right? Let's say, for instance, in your syllabus, you have, 10 topics. But for the questions paper, you include only 5 to 6 topics. That is not good. There you do not, maintain the content validity. The content that you included into the instrument is not valid, very simply. The content that you included into the instrument is not valid. Right? That is important. So in the case number 2, in your growth model, determinants of, when you find determinants of economic growth. Now maybe the main instrument is the model, the equation, right? Earlier we discussed that you will have to go for a well-specified model. Right? What do you mean by a well-specified model? You will have to include all the important determinants of economic growth into the equation, into the model. Otherwise, you do not maintain the content validity. Right? In that case, you are having a misspecified models. When you have a misspecified model, so that would lead to endogeneity and will give you a biased result. So therefore, the result is not valid, very simply. Right? Even in the third case, include all factors of satisfaction, right? When you do that research, right? So even this content validity can be measured by using factor analysis. So when you use questionnaires, right? Sometimes the content that you use, sometimes the questions that you use are not valid. The content in the questionnaire is the questions, right? Let's say you have 2 variables, X and Y, right? You drafted a question, right? Assuming you get information for the variable Y. But when the respondent, when the reader reads the question, he thought, like, now you're expecting information about X. Miscommunication. Those miscommunications would lead to content, would lead to issues, biasnesses. There you do not maintain the content validity in your questionnaire. So all those things we can capture, right, by using factor analysis, right? So try to use factor analysis to debug your questionnaire if you are using a questionnaire to collect your primary data. So that will help for you to even to maintain the construct validity and the content validity, right? So next type of, next component of validity is criterion related validity. Criterion related validity. Does the measure correct with external benchmarks? Does the measure correct with the external benchmarks? So that is what we observe under the criterion related validity. So there we can identify 2 components of criterion related validity, 2 methods of ensuring criterion related validity, that is concurrent validity and predictive validity. Under the concurrent validity, you compare your measures with already available benchmarks. Right? You compare it with already available benchmarks. Right? So, but with the predictive validity, so you try to predict by using your model and see whether the predictions are correct. So if the predictions are, correct, accurate, then it gives you the predictive validity, right? So if the measures that you have are valid with the current benchmarks, then it ensures the concurrent validity. So that is the two meanings, right? Let's see with some examples. Concurrent validity. So when you use that mathematics paper, right? So you can compare the result that these students get with their results of a standardized, accepted questions paper, like from the National Standard Maths exams, A level, O level, or something, right? If you are an O level teacher and you want to give some mathematics paper for your students, right? So you can ensure the concurrent validity of your questions paper if there is a nice association in between the marks that your students obtain for your paper and for that other standardized paper. If there is no significant difference in between the marks that your students do get for these two papers, for your paper and for that standardized paper, that means your paper, your instrument has the concurrent validity, right? So under the second research, there I want to study the study the determinants of economic growth. Let's say, so one of the regressor is good governance, right? Even for the good governance, we do not have a single variable, very easily find, right? So you can develop a common component, or you can develop an index by using, let's say, some other information like Kaufman et al.'s good governance indices, right? You can use factor analysis once again, right? And develop a common component and use that common factor as the good governance variable. So still, before using it, you will have to ensure its concurrent validity, right? Now you have a single variable. Who developed that? You developed it as the researcher. Then you will have to ensure its validity, its concurrent validity. You will make sure that it represents the good governance, the nature of the good governance in your context, in your country. You can compare it with some other alternative indexes and see whether there is a nice association. Or else you can subject it to your real world scenarios, right? And see, you can support it with the real world scenarios. During this period, I remember good governance is not that good in Sri Lanka. So what my index indicates during that particular period. During recent years, good governance is good. So what my indicator indicates. So that is what I mean. By subjecting your index into the real world scenarios, you can ensure the concurrent validity. So whatever it is, you will have to do that. So if you are developing an index, right? Or if you are taking a variable, right? Even whatever the variable, when you are taking a proxy, right? If you are taking a proxy, right? So you will have to ensure its concurrent validity. Now, for instance, in one of my previous research where I studied the determinants of, let's say, economic growth, so I happen to use this technology in my model. Technology. So when I go through the databases, I couldn't find a good proxy like, research and development. Even the research and development level was very insignificant during that period when I do this research in 2016. Then I had to go for an alternative proxy. Right? Then I searched literature. What are the other alternative proxies available? I found 1, 2, 3, right? Out of that, so I selected percentage of manufactured exports in our total mercantile exports. So that is the variable. What is it? Percentage of manufactured exports in our total mercantile exports. Now, just by selecting, nothing happens, right? You will have to validate it. After selecting this, you will have to validate it. You will have to, justify the representativeness, appropriateness of the variable. It should readily represent the original phenomena that I want to represent. I have to ensure the construct validity, right? I have to ensure the concurrent validity, right? So I ensured the construct validity, indicating, you see, look, right? If manufactured exports in our total export increases, that means our manufacturers do maintain a good technology, because in order to compete in foreign market, they should always keep up with the new technology. So if they are surviving in the international market, that means they use new technology. That is how, I remember. So that sort of approach I used to ensure the construct validity. And to see the concurrent validity, I go and I use this, real world phenomena, right? Look at this. Look at the trend in this particular variable. So during the periods now where we use, good technology, right? When there were technology booms in the country, following those booms, we see some significant improvements in exports. Following those technological booms, right? We can see some significant increases in our exports. So that means I use that real world, comparison, right, in order to ensure the concurrent validity of my selected variable, right? So that is how you have to, ensure the concurrent validity. So I go to the next slide. What is the time now? Yeah, time is running. So then the other type of validity is predictive validity, right? So we are talking about criterion related validity. So we said there are two types of criterion related validities, that is concurrent and predictive validity. So the next one is predictive validity. Now you look at the future, right? Now, for instance, let's say my first research is about this questions paper, right? So if I can ensure, right, if the students can get a higher mark for my paper, definitely they will score well in more difficult question papers in future, right? So that is a predictive validation. If today my student can get a better mark for this current paper, in future they have the potential in getting a better mark for some advanced questions papers, right? So if you can validate in that way, right, if you can run a correlation between these two, scores, the scores that they obtain for your paper, and after some period the scores that they obtain for that advanced paper. So if there is a nice correlation in between these two, that means the predictive validity of the instrument is ensured. So look at the example number 2, economic growth study. Can your growth model predict GDP growth in the next 5 years accurately, right? So ensure this predictive validity. So you will have to wait 5 years, however, right? But when it comes to policy level research, we take so much of time, right? So that's okay then. So your predictive capability of the model, predictivity of the model, predictive capability of the model, right? Right, now look at the third one. Current job satisfaction scores predict the employee turnover in 6 months. Now, for instance, let's say current job satisfaction level is really good. All the employees are saying, we are well satisfied with the organization. But let's say after 2-3 weeks, after 2-3 months, if they leave the company, that means the predictive validity is not maintained in your instrument. When you collect your data through the questionnaire, it says employees are well satisfied. But when it comes to reality, after 2-3 months, they leave the place. That means the particular instrument questionnaire has failed in maintaining the predictive validity. Right? Hope that is clear. So these are some of the tools that we can use to ensure the predictive validity. All these predictive models like time series forecasting models, regression models, sometimes correlation models. So we can use them, right, to ensure the predictive validity in your models, in your instruments. Okay, that's about the validity. Then we can move on to the final part. That is not that much. That is about the reliability, right? Reliability always ensures the consistency of your findings. So the first component of reliability is test, retest, reliability. Test, retest, reliability. Even in quantitative research, we can apply this, right? So even now, if you take that particular questions paper, first example, mathematics paper. So first you can give it today to your students and get the scores, marks, right? And in another 2-3 days time, once again, you distribute the same question without changing the context, right? Once again, you give the questions paper and ask your students to answer the questions paper, right? So during this particular time, there is no any chance for the students to learn anything else about the mathematics, right? So assuming the conditions are remain as it is, identical, so you go for this retest, right? So if there is a nice correlation in between these test scores, then you say your retest reliability is ensured in the instrument, right? Right. So let's see in the example number 2, right? In the example number 2, you measured the determinants of economic growth over, let's say, 20 years period, from 2005 to 2025. That is the data range you used. And if you want to ensure the retest reliability, so you can break this time period into several categories, like first 5 years period, next 5, likewise. You can divide it into 4-5 periods and then run the regression models for each of these 5 and compare the results. So if you get the same sort of result, right, there you maintain the test, retest reliability. Someone will argue then, how we can expect the same result, because the time contexts are totally different. First 5 years from 2005 to 2010, next 5 years 10 to 15, then 15 to likewise. Time contexts are totally different. Then can you expect same sort of result? We don't expect the identical result, but when we talk about the construct validity, I mentioned when you develop your model, it is really, really important to include context-specific variables. It can be geographical context, it can be time context, right? So that is the purpose of including those context-specific variables. That is to ensure the context-specific biasness. That is to eliminate the context-specific biasnesses, right? So if you can eliminate the context-specific biasnesses from your models, that means even though you test it for several periods, you would get some consistent results, right? Okay. So likewise, you can use these test instruments during 2-3 different periods and compare, right, the results thereafter, right, by maintaining the contexts smoothly, right? You might not get the identical result, but there can be a very high association, correlation in between these results. Right? If that is the case, your instrument ensures the test-retest reliability. Then the next important one, this is the most popular case among our students, right? Internal consistency, right? Or the internal reliability of your instruments. When you use question areas, most of the time our students use this Cronbach alpha, right? That is to ensure the internal consistency, right? What it says, internal consistency checks whether all the items, right, in a test or question area that are meant to measure the same concept, right? That are meant to measure the same concept. So that's why initially I recommended you to use factor analysis to debug the questions, right? Sometimes there can be questions. So you developed, you drafted the question to get the information about satisfaction or else customer purchase intention, right? But the question actually gives you information about buying behavior. So intention and buying behavior are two very close variables. Most of the time, the scopes do overlap, right? So in that case, you might have some, irrelevant questions that do not give you the expected result. So very easily you can, understand the internal consistency, right? So let's say, Lamai, for instance, my variable is motivation. To capture the motivation, right, I have 5 questions. I develop those 5 questions to cover the scope of the motivation variable that I initially decided, right? So I can say internal consistency is there if all these 5 questions readily represent one component of the one important characteristics of the motivation variable. Otherwise, the internal consistency is not there. So that is what actually this Cronbach alpha does, right? It see the association among the latents that you have in your construct. Construct is the attitude or else the intention, purchase intention. The questions that I use are the latent variables. So Cronbach alpha runs a correlation among these questions or the latent variables and see whether they are nicely gel. Right? If that is the case, it says, yes, your instrument ensures the internal consistency. Right? So that matters even when you use secondary data. Right? So if you remember my initial example, one of the previous examples, so I had to develop a good governance indicator for the Sri Lankan context. But when I look at data for good governance, I couldn't find a single variable that represents good governance. Instead, what I found was 6 different indexes, right? All these 6 different indexes account for one component of good governance. And they are actually mutually exclusive. But when you mix them together, when you get all of those 6 indexes together, then only we can say that is good governance. But individually, they represent only a component, only a small part of good governance, like rule of law, government credibility. So likewise, what I did was I mixed them together by using factor analysis and developed the common component. So since there is a very good association among these 6 indices, 6 individual indices, I confidently say the internal consistency, internal reliability of the common component that I developed is very high. Why? Because there is a very significant association among those 6 governance indices developed by Kaufman et al. 1991. So maintenance of internal consistency, right, in your constructs, in your variables is really, really important. Okay, next, we can move to intra-rate reliability. Inter-rate reliability, most of the time. So this particular approach uses in qualitative research. I think I'm right, Sarat sir? So intra-rated is very much subjective approach, right? So let's say, for instance, there are okay, we can go to the mathematics example. So if you read this particular scenario, you can understand, right? So let's say there are some questions in my mathematics paper, right? So I distributed the mathematics paper, let's say, among 20 students, and 10 papers were examined by myself and 10 papers were examined by another examiner. So there should be a proper match among the scores that we give to the students. So we should have a good answer script with us. So without having a good answer script with us, so if we just mark, and if there is a significant difference among the scores, among the marks that we give, then that particular instrument fails to maintain the intra-rate reliability, right? So if that particular instrument has the inter-rate reliability, whatever the number of markers that you have, all will give you the same sort of marks for the students depending on their capabilities. Okay, that is about this reliability. This is not that much applied in our quantitative research. So most of the time I have seen it is being applied in this qualitative nature of research, right? These are some of the references I used here, and thank you very much. So if you have any questions, so I can answer. So at the moment I feel like there are no questions. No, right? So Lakmini, I think we can wrap up the session.
Yes, sir.
Sarasagi and Hityanid.
Sir, Sarat sir was initially at the meeting.
Okay, let's find out.
Okay, sir. So, very good evening to our esteemed guest and to the respected audience again. So, it's truly an honor for me to deliver the word of thanks on behalf of the Department of Accountancy and Finance, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka, so marking the successful conclusion of the 15th session of the Thesis Mastery Program 2025. And to begin with, I would like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to today's distinguished speakers, Professor T.U.I. Peiris, Head Department of Accountancy and Finance, and as well Dr. P.K.S. Munasinghe, Senior Lecturer, Department of Tourism Management. So, dear sirs, your session on navigating validity in quantitative and qualitative research approaches was both enlightening and thought-provoking. So it offered us a clear perspective on how to strengthen the credibility and trustworthiness of our research findings. So as well, we are sincerely grateful for the depth of knowledge and the practical insights that you shared with us today. So your valuable contributions have undoubtedly enriched our understanding, and we look forward to apply these insights in our academic pursuits and as well in future research endeavors. So with that note, I also wish to express my sincere gratitude to the Faculty of Management Studies under the leadership of Professor Tulasi Nyanapala for continuously supporting impactful academic initiatives such as this. And in particularly, I extend a special thanks once again to Professor T.U.I. Peiris for his invaluable guidance and commitment, which have been instrumental in driving this program this much forward. And as well, my heartfelt appreciation goes to Professor Jonathan Devsiri, the main coordinator of the Thesis Mastery Program, for his continued encouragement and the strategic direction throughout this series. And as well, I would like to warmly acknowledge the efforts of our dedicated organizing team, Ms. Shanika, Ms. Madhusha, Ms. Rashmi, Mr. Sajit, and Mr. Dakshina, for their excellent coordination and attention to detail, which ensure the smooth execution of today's session. Last but certainly not least, a sincere thank to all our participants, including all the academics, researchers, and the students for your active participation, and as well the thoughtful engagement throughout the sessions, which truly enriched the discussion this much contributed to the success. Before I conclude, I'm pleased to invite you all to join us for our upcoming session of the Thesis Mastering Program, so to title From Start to Finish, the Maintaining Research Focus for the Meaningful Results. So to be conducted by Dr. H.R. Sampath, attached to the Department of Accountancy and Finance, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. So with that note, thank you once again for being with us today, and I wish you all a very pleasant and restful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmi.